giving you the insider takes and the big picture view on the Dogs. This is On the Beat, presented by Ingles with DawgNation insider Mike Griffith and Cody Chaffins.
Welcome into On the Beat. Cody Chaffins alongside Mike Griffith. Who is the most important Georgia Bulldog this year? Who is the best player on this Georgia roster? These are questions I'm going to make Mike Griffith have to answer by the end of the show today. We've also got former Georgia coach Mark Richt in a one-on-one interview with Mike Griffith coming up. And also Carson Beck sends a message through Mike to DawgNation. We will share that with you on today's show. But Mike, final week of July, and do you believe schools are starting back this week?
You know what always gets me? They love to start school here early, but they like to get out early too. I guess that's the flip side. If you're going to start in early August, you're going to get out in May. But yeah, it's that time of year. It's exciting. It's hard to believe we've cycled through another one, Cody.
Yeah, I've seen the high school football players out there working. Georgia ready to open fall camp here any minute. We are getting closer and closer to football season. Now, I think back to my school days. I think back to the yearbook. You would open the yearbook, and there would be the superlatives at the end of the year, right? The most athletic, the best smile, the funniest. Mike, did you ever win one?
I did.
What were you?
I was the most talkative. Shocker, huh?
That's so good. That is so good. I love that. Okay, so we decided to kind of on that note do some superlatives. And now this is not the end of the year. This is the beginning of the year for the Georgia Bulldogs. And of course, we're not going to go with which dog has the best smile. Although if we were going to go with that, now there's some good choices out there. But we will start with the most likely to convert a 3rd and 7. Who's going to be our guy this year on 3rd and 7? Mike, what do you think?
Well, you know, the Georgia's offense is predicated on what the defense does, Cody. So I actually got 3 answers. When Gunner Stockton fades back, first of all, I don't think they're handing off for it. I like the offensive line, but I don't like them that much. I'm going to the money guy, the guy that's making more, that has the highest on-3 valuation on the team. You didn't recruit Zachariah Branch not to use him, so I'm going to go with Branch first. I'm going to give you some Cash Jones second.
Ooh,
He'll
money,
be 2
money.
in that. He comes out of the backfield. He makes those. And then Lawson Lucky, a guy that can get the yards after the catch as well as catch it over the middle.
Yeah, Lawson Lucky, the man I had written on my sheet as well. 21 catches for first downs last season, which was up there, one of the tops on the team. Now, he did have 7 contested targets. None of those he caught. So I want to see him catch the ball a little bit better when he's in a congested space. But 21 catches, he finds the sticks. He gets past the sticks.
Well, now, Cody, if it's congested, then Gunner may not have made the right read. The whole idea is the matchup. That's why I went with 3 of them. That's why I went with 3.
I like Zach Branch to be that idea as well. All right, so we'll kind of flip it over. Most likely to sack the quarterback on the other team's 3rd and 7. Give me a defender here.
Well, I can't tell you where he's going to line up, and I think that's part of the plan, but there's no way you're keeping Chris Cole off the field. That's my number 1 pick for most likely. Elijah Griffin, I know Kirby says he's only a freshman, but this guy's talented. And then 3rd, Raylan Wilson, another super freakish athletic linebacker.
Yeah, I put C.J. Allen. Now, C.J., usually they have him dropping back. He's not rushing the passer much, but I love when he does rush the passer, he gets there a lot. So only rushed the passer 23% of the time last year, but he was getting there with 20 pressures last season. So C.J. Allen's one of those guys they like to unlock, and maybe a 3rd and 7, you can afford to send a little pressure that way. So I think C.J. Allen could apply some pressure, but I do like the Chris Cole answer because is Chris Cole the Jalen Walker of this year? We all want to make that. Now, Jalen Walker's a first-round pick, and that's not fair to a guy who's never been a full-time starter for Georgia, but the skill set looks a lot like that, and I would love to see them kind of figure out ways to get Chris Cole getting after the quarterback.
Yeah, no doubt. And you don't keep a guy like that off the field. And Kirby even talked about that. You know, we've seen Glenn Schumann do a lot with a lot of different packages. You know, you had kind of the Brock Bowers joker on offense. I think he's kind of the joker on defense, a little bit like Jalen Walker. He can hit you from a lot of spots.
All right, next one is one that neither Mike nor I ever won in high school. Most attractive red zone target. Now, Mike, you may have been the most attractive red zone target. Not most attractive. We ain't winning that one. But most attractive red zone target for Georgia this year.
Well, I'm going right down the list again. A guy that got hot last year was Oscar Delp. We saw him in the back of the end zone a couple times against Tennessee, like him. And then you went out and got Colby Young and Noah Thomas because they're big guys, right? You can't help but like the big target wide receiver. Maybe you get the isolated one-on-one. Gunner throws it up there, a nice fade or 50-50 ball. So in order, Oscar Delp off play action, Colby Young, Noah Thomas on those jump balls or those corner routes.
Yeah, there you see Noah Thomas, 6'5". That's why you brought him in there. Throw it up, let him make the play. Oscar Delp also 6'5", and you mentioned Delp there. The last 3 games of the regular season last year, Delp had 7 catches, but 4 of them were touchdowns. The man is a red zone target if you've ever seen it. So would love to see Oscar Delp. Let's do that more in the beginning of the year this year than it took till, the Tennessee game last year to get that going. But would love to see that right off the bat this year.
And no doubt about it, they need to get that running game going. And Kirby Smart said, hey, you want to use the tight end, you got to get the running game going because a lot of those tight end passes come off of play action.
All right, this one doesn't necessarily have to do with the production they are going to have, but I'm just curious who you think, at least on this item, we may at the end of the season go back and revisit some of these superlatives and see how right we were or wrong. But who do you think on offense, when they're out there, who's the fan favorite? Who is everybody going crazy for?
Well, right now, through the first 2 games of the season, that's going to be Gunner Stockton. There's no doubt. Everybody's pulling for Gunner. I mean, he's a local kid. You can't help but like his story. He waited 3 years to play. He stuck around. He earned the job. So he's 1A, and then 1B is Nate Frazier. You can't help but like this guy's personality. It's infectious. May get a little carried away from time to time with a gator chop, but I think Nate's a guy that's going to have some fun quotes and a lot of confidence this year.
And Nate's a guy, he may have the best smile on this Georgia team as well. Infectious personality. I'm going to stick with a running back. Cash Jones is still going to be money for these Dog fans. And the way Cash seems to find the end zone, have a nose for the goal line, I think that he's one of those folks that Georgia fans, he's already a fan favorite, and just kind of his story is a fan favorite. But I do think he's one of those guys we're not talking enough about this offseason. We keep bringing up Bo Walker. We keep wanting to talk about Josh McCray transferring in and Nate Frazier. But Cash Jones is going to be still solid for this Georgia offense.
And he's got a great number, says at Mike Griffith 32 on Twitter.
There you go. All right, who's our fan favorite on the defensive side?
Well, I got 3 guys here. This was just too hard. Listen, everybody loves Elijah Griffin, the freshman. Everybody can't wait to see KJ Bolden. KJ makes plays. He loves being at Georgia. And then I got CJ Allen, the kid from Barnesville, the Mike linebacker. He's going to be a team spokesman. I got to split it up 3 ways. All 3 of those guys, fan favorites.
All right, fan favorite, where my head went, is Justin Williams. He, to me, was trying to work himself into a fan favorite, and he just played special teams last year. But he's a guy that's constantly pumping the crowd up. Folks at Sanford love to see the players on the field, try and get them involved, and he's got a great personality. If you don't follow Justin Williams on TikTok, this guy is a TikTok master. So you get to see his, he kind of has that extra side of his personality that he gets to show on social media. So Justin Williams, if he can get out there and make some plays, definitely going to be a fan favorite this year.
As long as he doesn't put a picture up of buying a Lamborghini, I think he's going to be just fine, Cody.
I think it's just, and no offense to Justin Williams, it's just silly dances. I was going to say dorky dances. Sometimes it's kind of, I'm very much a dorky person.
I think silly's a better, yeah.
We'll say it is very silly dances. They are having a good, he and Chris Cole, man, they look like they're having a great time. Now we'll see once fall camp starts if they have the energy to do a TikTok dance and learn the choreography. But for now, this summer, they look like they've been having a whole lot of fun. All right, the next one is a category that I didn't really define. I just said old dog, new trick. So who is your old dog, new trick? We'll do one on offense and one on defense. Give me your offense.
I think it's going to be Dylan Bell. I think he's going to be my comeback player. I look at old dog, new trick. I think consistency is the name of the game. I think he's going to be productive. And you're going to go, oh, yeah, that's that guy a couple years ago that showed us that versatility and came up clutch and did so many different things. So I'm going to go with Dylan Bell on offense.
I'm really interested to see because in the spring, Kirby kept talking a lot about how Dylan has agreed he wants to be a little more of a running back like he was in 2023. But then all of a sudden, over the summer with Josh McCray coming in and Bo Walker kind of emerging at spring practice, I don't know that they need that much help in the backfield that it looked like at one time they might need. So I'm interested to see if that new trick kind of gets in there with Dylan Bell and how much that is.
Maybe a little bit more in the slot is kind of what I'm thinking. Is that we're going to see him, maybe a little bit of the Cash Jones role, maybe lining up a little bit more in the slot, and that kind of goes along with the new trick as well.
And he caught a lot of passes for first downs last year as well when I was looking up that stat for Lawson Lucky. So he's going to be a clutch guy in there for Gunner Stockton. My old dog, new trick. Now, you could just go Gunner Stockton, right? New trick is, hey, be the starter for the whole season. And he is an old dog. He has been there for a long time. But I'll also go Micah Morris. He's a guy who's been kind of a hole plugger and not, a role filler. He comes in, he'll fill in when Tate Ratledge gets hurt, but he'll play a little bit here and there, but come off for a few series. Now he needs to be the guy. He needs to be a rock for this offense. I'm ready to see Micah Morris in this, maybe his 17th year on campus at the University of Georgia. He's an old dog. He's got a new trick here, being the solid lockdown, every down guard for this team.
Maybe the guy that the quarterback ducks behind on the quarterback sneak, but there's no doubt they're counting on him to be a bulldozer on that interior line, Cody.
They've said how angry he is for years now. I can't wait to see that out there. All right, give me a defensive old dog new trick.
I like Jonell Aguero. I thought he had a great spring playing that star position. Last year you were just kind of trying to get through that spot. You moved Malachi around a little bit. I think Aguero, though, is on the verge of a really big breakthrough. So I'm going to go with Jonell Aguero as my old dog new trick on defense.
I really like that answer, and it didn't even cross my mind when I was filling out my list here. So I love Jonell Aguero as an answer. Mine was Christian Miller. He's a guy. He's been the old dog. He's been there a while now, but he's never had to be the guy on the defensive line. Last year, you're sliding him in and out. You got Naz Stackhouse, Warren Brinson, who everybody's talking about. But this is the year that every team's gotten him circled as the game wrecker, right? We're going to send the double team his way, and then somebody's at least going to chip him and then go to the linebacker. So this is the year he's got to prove that he can get double teamed and how he can deal with that. So I think Christian Miller, he's going to be a key part to this defense, and he is going to be an old dog who's got a new trick of being the man there on the Georgia defensive line.
Probably got a new checkbook, too. He was one of the guys they gave a lot of money to. That new trick's going to be cashing that check because Christian was the guy they invested in to keep around with big expectations, and I'm with you. I think he's going to do a lot of great things this season, earn every penny of it.
All right, these may have been talked about already. Fantastic freshman offense, fantastic freshman defense.
The cool thing so far is we didn't pre-rehearse this or send each other our lists, and we've had all these different players, but we're going to probably overlap here. I got to think so. Now, offensive, there's a couple different ways you go. I'm going to go with C.J. Wiley, though. I think C.J. Wiley is going to be the freshman that's going to jump out. I think he's going to make some plays. So I'm going to start out with C.J. Wiley on offense.
The thing I like about C.J. Wiley, his dad's played in college football. He knows what to expect. His dad's going to have him ready. He also played at big-time college football or big-time high school football at Milton High School, caught from a college quarterback in Luke Nickel at Milton. So this step up for him is not going to be a huge step. And we've heard Terrence Edwards has been training him for years and years now. So you better believe it may not be as big of a change. And the wide receiver, kind of similar to what I was thinking, Mike, is it's one of those spots where a lot of guys are going to get playing time, right? They're just going to cycle a lot of guys through. And for that reason, I put Bo Walker there because I feel like the running back, you're going to get a bunch of guys touches, and maybe it's the hot hand who gets, Nate Fraser's going to get the most carries, but they like to work a lot of guys in there. And Bo Walker, heard a lot of good things about him in the spring. Expect him to get on the field and make an impact this year.
Yeah, seeing that 24 looks like Malachi on an interception return, but I like the wiggle. I like the acceleration. And to your point, all the reviews have been very positive. Crowded backfield, but there's plenty of room for a freshman. If he can play, like Kirby says, if they can play, they can play.
Yeah, we saw it Nate Fraser last year. You're a freshman, you can get on the field. And Nate Fraser was a late enrollee, right? Didn't even have spring practice under his belt. All right, give me a defensive, fantastic freshman, and I think we're going to overlap here too.
It's got to be Elijah Griffin. I mean, we heard so much about him, and sometimes when you hear a lot about these guys, especially linemen, it doesn't necessarily come to fruition because it's a man's position, and these guys just aren't, physically mature. But everything we've heard about Elijah Griffin is both physically and mentally mature. I mean, Kirby Smart talked about his work ethic. He talked about, he loves this kid. And when Kirby's raving about a freshman, I mean, that just says a mouthful to me.
And I think the other part that we've kind of hit is the rotation at defensive tackle. Those guys go in and 3 new ones come out, and then some guys coming in for third down. So if you can kind of find where you fit in there, I think you can get a lot of snaps and make an impact as a freshman. So those are fantastic freshmen. Now we're getting to the big ones. This is like the Academy Awards when it's getting real late at night, and they're getting to these really important categories. So we're going best all around. So this is not who's the most important. We'll get to that one in just a minute. But who is the best football player on this Georgia roster in 2025?
Offense and defense, or just
one
all...
on each? We'll go one on each.
Okay. All right. Well, you got to go where the money's at. I mean, like I said, they're paying Zach Branch for a reason. You know, he's an all-purpose guy. We're going to see him returning some kicks, maybe some punts, and being dynamic at receiver. So I'm going to go with Branch on offense.
Interesting. I'm going to go Nate Frazier for my offensive guy. I think he has a chance to really. You can see him as an NFL player just with what he's shown. Now, can't fumble the ball. Right? Got to get that cleaned up, but I believe that's something that's definitely been harped on this spring and will be in this fall camp as well. Give me a defensive best all around.
I'm going to go with KJ Bolden. I mean, it's CJ Allen is very tempting, but there's so many linebackers, but I just feel like KJ is the ultimate center fielder. And, you know, the way he came up and hit that 235-pound senior running back, Phil Maffa, the way he took him out in the opening game. I mean, this guy plays fearless. I love his energy. I love he's so acrobatic. He's fast. I'm all in on KJ Bolden. I see a future All-American, if not this year, next year, and probably an eventual Thorpe Award winner.
Yeah, and I think what it is, too, is it's not only all those traits that you talked about physically. Like, he can physically go out there and do it, and that's why he could do it as a freshman. But the thing that keeps a lot of freshmen, there's a lot of really physically gifted freshmen out there, but the thing that keeps them off the field is mentally being able to absorb the game. And he's in that position at safety where you're lining people up. You got to know what's going on. You've got to be mentally strong. And Kirby Smart has praised that as much as anything as well. And to me, that's what says, you know, this guy at the next level is going to be a first round kind of pick because he's got it mentally as well as physically. And I think that's what's going to be really important for him. Not just being able to get there, but knowing where to be. I think KJ Bolden, yeah, same for me. Best all around on defense.
Yeah, you got to like what KJ brings. And so much of this team, Cody, is going to be about leadership and energy. And Kirby really harped on that a lot at the media days, you know, the fire, passion, and energy and wanting these guys to play with a reckless abandon. And, you know, to me, KJ really embodies that. And, you know, I thought Branch did that as well in the offense. And that's really going to be important against the type of schedule Georgia has. You're going to need those guys that make those special plays. I remember Gene Stallings used to tell me, you go back and look, there's usually four or five plays that define every game, and that's where your playmakers step up, right? Great players make big time plays. I think I just butchered the heck out of that accent, but you know what I'm saying.
I'm right there with you. This last one, so we will end. It was an interesting topic on DawgNation Daily last week, kind of what got me thinking about it. Brandon Adams was talking about who he thought the most important players for this season for Georgia would be. And so I was like, okay, so not necessarily the best players, but the most important. The season hinges on, you know, not necessarily, but hinges on these guys. So I'm interested to hear from you. Who are the most important player? We can do one on each, offense and defense.
Well, it starts out with Gunner Stockton. I mean, the quarterback means everything, not just his ability to make the plays, but his ability to make the right decisions, his ability to stay healthy. I mean, this is a guy that's been in the program for years. He knows the offense better than anyone. He brings that dual threat as a runner. So when you talk about a guy that you hope plays up to a ceiling and makes good decisions, that's going to determine a lot of the outcome of the game, ball's in his hands on every snap, it's got to be Gunner Stockton on offense.
I was interested because Brandon, I will tell you, his answers last week were Ernest Green and Monroe Freeling, and his idea was if they play well, the running game goes good, less pressure on Gunner, less pressure on the defense. All of these things work in synergy with your two offensive tackles. But when I heard the most important, kind of where my head went was like, if this guy gets injured, you're in a heap of trouble. And so to me, I was thinking about the depth, and I was thinking, okay, so depth-wise, and I'll just ask you this question, you lose an offensive tackle, one of those tackles, you've got some guys, you know, some guys like Bo Hughley who've been in the program for a while. Is he ready to step up and be a starter if you lost one of those guys early? Or would you feel better? We've talked so much about Ryan Puglisi. What's the drop-off there? And does that make a player more important maybe than another, is basically who's behind you, who could fill in your shoes?
Well, you can game plan around a weak left tackle or an inexperienced left tackle. You can bring a tight end in. You can roll the pocket. You can bring a less experienced guy in and be just mindful of that. The quarterback can audible out. He can throw the ball away quickly. You can't game plan around a bad quarterback that makes bad decisions and doesn't throw the ball on target. So that's my argument. If I were going to go with an irreplaceable offensive lineman, I would actually say Drew Bobo. You know, because that center quarterback exchange, it's a guy that has his hands on the ball every single snap, that can't be dominated, that can't blow assignments, that's got to make the right line call. So if I were going to go offensive lineman, I would say Drew Bobo.
And I think the depth behind him, yeah, maybe a little bit less as well. So really interesting points there. I would go Gunner Stockton as well for my most important player on offense. Who would be the most important player on the defensive side of the ball?
I'm going to go with Christian Miller, because he is the most dominant defensive lineman. He is the most experienced guy. And I think there's a drop off after Christian Miller. Even though Elijah is extremely talented, he is a freshman. I don't think that he's going to be able to play the same number of snaps as Christian. You got to have that rock solid guy. I think back to the championship teams, and there were a lot of stars up front, but to me, it always started with Jordan Davis and that ability to plug the middle and play those two gaps. And I see Christian Miller in a very similar role to that.
Yeah, if you can't stop the run or you can't get off the field on 3rd and short, and you can't get a push up there in the front, I do think that changes football games when a team gets a first down and they keep the drive going and your guys are out there getting more tired and your offense, more importantly, is sitting on the bench. I do think you've got to have that push up the middle. I was thinking about this too, and I don't want to put like Gabe Harris out there, but I do think that position group, that position group's got to, we got to see one of those guys be the most important player this year, because that's the one I've got the most question marks about, are those edge rushers.
Yeah, or that outside jack linebacker. There's no doubt you got the transfer from Army coming in there. So I'm with you. I have more confidence in that position. That's been a position that Georgia's recruited really well. We talked about using Chris Cole in a lot of different ways. So I feel like they can hit you a lot of different ways. I just know there's a premium on those interior defensive linemen that can make it through the year, that can play that number of snaps, and that can dominate. That's why Jalen Carter was so important to the team in 21 and 22. Now, I don't know that Christian Miller is going to have a Jalen. I don't know if we're going to see another, Jalen Carter. I put him in the same, categories in Ndamukong Suh when it comes down to defensive line interior dominators. But I think Christian Miller has a chance to be one of the best in the country.
Yeah, hopefully he can live up to that. So that is our 2025 preseason superlatives. Now all these guys, like in the year, we can go take that awkward photo with somebody else afterwards. Mike, I do want to ask you this, because you've covered so much football for such a long time. How different do you think when we do this at the end of the season, our picks will be?
I think we probably nailed about half of them. There's always guys that emerge.
And isn't that crazy to think about?
Yeah, especially the fan favorite part, right? I mean, there's always guys that emerge, though. Football is a team game, and we really don't know. I think Georgia still has to learn a little bit about itself. I mean, they've got a preliminary plan and tentative plans for what they want to do, but as the year progresses, they're going to see different guys do different things. They're going to see how teams play them. They're going to look to exploit different opponents in different ways. So I think we probably batted about 500 there, Cody.
And that to me is so, like, we cover Georgia football for a living. You are in Athens talking to these guys. You know everybody. And the fact that even still, it's about 500. It's a very interesting thing. And I think you're probably right, by the way, because there's so much that happens throughout the course of a season. And Georgia has so much talent that it doesn't take much there are plenty of guys who can pop. It's just a matter of getting their time and, playing right at the right time, right?
Yeah, no doubt about it. You never know who's going to be on the spot or who's going to be asked to make a key play. I mean, if Colby Young comes down with a catch, they beat Alabama, who knows what happens with the season and the direction. I mean, as it was, they won the SEC title, but a win over Alabama sure would have felt good, and now we're going to see what happens this year. I mean, we may not know the answer to some of these questions until Texas comes to Georgia in November. Texas coming off a bye week, by the way. So maybe the SEC scheduling office playing a pretty important role, maybe most important external factor.
There you go.
The schedule seems to always be pretty important.
All right, so coming up in just a minute, Mike had a big trip last week where he got to talk to former Georgia head coach Mark Richt one-on-one. We're going to hear that conversation. And also, former Georgia quarterback Carson Beck sends a message to DawgNation through Mike Griffith. He will share that with you. That's all coming up. This is On the Beat, presented by Ingalls.
It's time to discover the convenience and time savings of contact-free pickup with Ingalls Curbside. Just visit shop.ingalls-markets.com or download the app. And your Ingalls personal shopper gets to work with specialized training on how to select the freshest items for a pre-scheduled pickup. They'll even text you with updates. You pull up to a designated space and your personal shopper delivers your items right to your vehicle. Fresh, fast, and affordable. It's all in the bag. Ingalls. Low prices. Love the savings.
All right, so a couple of weeks ago on this show, we were from SEC Media Days. Well, last week, Mike had the chance to go to ACC Media Days, and I'm curious the big difference that your takeaway from going from the big dog to maybe who we call the little brother of Media Days.
Well, I was surprised it was very well attended. It was very different, though. I thought, a lot more casual, I think, at ACC Media Days. I mean, the fact I was able to sit down one-on-one with Mario Cristobal for 15 minutes and sit down one-on-one with Carson Beck for 15 minutes. Wow. And as you know, that just doesn't happen at SEC Media Days. There's just such a throng of people and the demands are such. But I thought the ACC really worked it well. Probably helped being that Miami was the first team and I got there pretty early Monday morning. But yet and still, and Miami's willingness to let a Georgia reporter sit down with Mario and to sit down with Carson, knowing fully well I was going to ask a lot of Georgia questions, and they were fine with that. So I think Miami's marketing approach was a little bit different. There wasn't a whole lot of people from Miami there, which is also really different. We got 30 guys that cover Georgia on a daily basis, whereas Miami, a lot of things going on down there. Still baseball season. You got a basketball. They got an NFL team. So that was kind of different, kind of neat, but the setup wasn't quite as conducive. We were really fortunate, as you know, to have the College Football Hall of Fame in Atlanta. Of course, Gary Stokan had a lot to do with that. So I think facilities-wise, Atlanta and SEC a little bit better equipped. It was a little bit crazier down there in terms of the setup, but it was effective. But there's no doubt it was different. And they don't have all the former great players like the SEC does on the SEC network. So I think those were probably the two primary differences.
And one thing that is similar to both is at SEC Media Days, we got in there with some TV personalities and got their take on Georgia football, whether that's Benjamin Watson or Cole Kublik or any of those folks. Peter Burns comes to mind. So we talked to all of those guys at SEC Media Days. Well, at ACC Media Days, Mike caught up with a big-time TV personality. We just know him as our former coach. It is Mark Richt with Mike Griffith from ACC Media Days.
Well, I'm here with Mark Richt. We're here at the ACC Media Days. Coach, obviously a ton of things that are being talked about. A lot of people asking about the college football playoff. You're someone who's coached in the SEC and the ACC. We're hearing the Big Ten saying everybody should play 9 conference games. Your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I don't know if that's the right answer or not. I know if you look at the Week 1 schedule this season alone, some great matchups between Power 5 teams that are non-conference games that probably don't exist. If everybody goes to 9 games, it'd be a lot less likely to play an LSU if you're Clemson or vice versa. And so I'd be a little bit concerned about what it would do to diminish the rest of the regular season. But the other thing that has to come into play is the strength of schedule. Do you have enough strength of schedule to get into the playoff as an at-large bid if you don't win the league? If you don't play 9 conference games, I think if you play solid teams outside of your conference, the strength of schedule could be a strong enough to get in.
Yeah, no doubt. You look at Miami playing Notre Dame in the opener. That's a big win for Miami that would help them out. And, speaking of Miami, Carson Beck is there now. Georgia quarterback. You and Carson, the guys that went from Georgia to Miami, right? 2 peas in a pod.
I went from Miami to Georgia to Miami.
Okay, Miami to Georgia to Miami. I got you there.
But Carson is. It's going to be interesting for him. I mean, he's going from a college town to more of a pro town in the atmosphere. I mean, the fan base at the U is the people in that area. The city of Miami. It's not a bunch of alumni coming. It's a very small private school. Nothing like Georgia as far as volume of people. And so it's different. But as far as a place to live and a place to hang out, a place that has a great vibe to it, as the recruits say, I think he's going to enjoy Miami, maybe too much.
Yeah, pretty good supporting cast around him. He's got a chance there.
Yeah, the offensive line in Miami is outstanding, maybe the best of the country. Really, and of course, Mario is an offensive lineman. He's a player. He's got a guy coaching those guys that do it. They do a great job of recruiting, developing, and he's going to be protected very well.
Yeah, Carson said that the offenses he ran at Georgia for Todd Monken and Mike Bobo really prepared him for the pro-style offense they're going to run down there. A lot of freedom. Mike Bobo's a guy that gets talked about a lot. Offensive coordinators, I mean, what a thankless job to be the play caller. You know that. You were there.
You said it. If you're the play caller, you're going to catch out. That's part of the job.
When Mike and Kirby go back to work with a new quarterback, what are some of the things that you try to work on when you get a new quarterback and you're kind of redefining your offense? It's not a whole new book, but you've got a different guy under center now.
Well, you got to find out what he does well and build on that. You can't try to make him something he's not. And hopefully you recruit your quarterback position to fit your system. And systems aren't totally rigid all the time. You can emphasize the pass more, the play action pass more. have things in your book that one guy might do better than another. I mean, when I was at Florida State, I had Charlie Ward, and he did well with the spread look, and then I've had guys that do better in the I formation. When you had it in the system, they would do that. But you know, I think Mike caught probably more hell than he should have last year. And I think Georgia dropped more balls than anybody in the know.
If they did.
If somebody took the stats and just said every ball that was catchable was caught, if you had the receptions, yardage, and possible touchdowns, and who knows the kind of season we're going to win offensively.
Yeah, and how does that change a game? I mean, just you were mentioning one drive.
One drive. I mean, one drop is one drive, and one drive can cost a game. So if you just take one drive a game and score 7 instead, that's 70 more points in the season.
And that's quite a bit. You know, one of the things you've been involved with, still in the Athens area, your son just got the promotion,
right.
Head coach at Prince. Congratulations on that, Prince Avenue Christian. But you're still involved with the bowling tournament that you put on. I want to take this opportunity to let you tell people about it. I mean, we broadcast and stream it live on DawgNation, and we'll be doing that again this year. Kirby, you got Kirby signed up for it. Anytime he pulls the players out and puts them in the bowling lanes. How did this thing come together, and what do you see with this? How much fun are you having with it?
Well, you know, of course, most people know, but I've got Parkinson's, and we're trying to think of a way to raise some money for Parkinson's, and then I've got a little granddaughter who's got Crohn's.
Right.
And so my wife's like, well, you're not going to just raise money for Parkinson's and not Crohn's, right? So as it turns out, there's kind of a relationship between the two. And so because of that, and at the University of Georgia, the center, the Isaacson Center, they work on those very things. So I decided to try to find a way to raise money, and I love bowling. And I figured instead of, doing the golf tournament, let's do a bowling tournament. You don't have to worry about the rain.
That's right.
There's 32 lanes instead of 16 or 18 holes. And we just charge X amount of dollars per lane. And the whole key is having the Georgia Bulldogs as the celebrity bowlers, which Cody provides.
Yeah.
And those kids do. They have a good time too. But we've raised a lot of money. About $1.5 million in the last 2 years, and they're going to break $2 million this year.
So this will be the third annual Dog Bowl.
Dog Bowl 2025.
One more question for you. We're seeing this about coaches being GMs, transfer portal, NIL. You worked with Josh Brooks. He was your director of football operations, right? He was your football guy, and you see Kirby with his business degree. As far as handling this, we know Texas has got a lot of money. Ohio State's got a lot of money, but how valuable is it to Georgia to have a guy like Josh Brooks and a head coach with a business degree like Kirby in the moment?
Josh is very capable, and Kirby is too. And the thing they got to decide is, I think the thing Kirby's got to decide is how much does he want on his plate. He can handle it all.
Right.
He can handle negotiations. He can handle discipline. He can handle the football end. He can handle recruiting. But he's one guy, So I think he's got to sit there and say, how much can I delegate and still have the quality that we need? And so it'll be interesting to see if there will be a true GM position.
He's always going to call himself that, even if he hires somebody to do all that stuff.
Right. But there are some things that could be done, at least administratively, that I think can come off his plate to a certain degree.
It'll be interesting to see how Georgia handles it. Appreciate the time with Coach Richt. Back to you, Cody.
Really, really good stuff there. Excited about the bowling again this year. I didn't know it was officially out there, but we'll put it officially out there. That's exciting. And then the last thing he talked about, though, I mean, what an authority Mark Richt is. Like, he knows all of those things that come at a head coach. He knows what the AD is. And the fact that he's saying, yes, Kirby can do it all. Should he do it all, or does he want to do it all? Is really, really interesting point.
Yeah, that was my takeaway too, Cody. Even it sounded like Coach Richt would hire a GM if he was still a head coach. I mean, there is a lot, and to that point, Kirby has hired a lot of more people in the Georgia football building to handle those responsibilities. He likes to be the closer. He likes, you heard what he said about valuing relationships over transactions. I think that's where he's doubling down on not having a GM that would make it a little less personal. He wants to be up front and be in those meetings at this stage. At least this is the way Georgia's going to approach it. And, when we asked Josh Brooks about it at the SEC spring meetings, he said that's something they're going to try to do this way. And And it's something that's going to continue to be evaluated. We'll see how that trend works out at these other places. Obviously, Oklahoma and North Carolina, two of the more notable programs that have hired some high-profile people into those positions.
Yeah, it really seems like Kirby Smart doesn't want a suit involved. Like everybody calls a guy a suit. That's the one thing that they don't want a suit involved, because that does kind of make it so much less personal, right?
Yeah, and it's relationships over transactions. And, I think Kirby is very involved in the talent acquisition. I think, one of the things he does best is identifying talent. I had that discussion, last week with somebody, and they're like, well, there's this 5-star and there's that. I said, you realize that the star rankings don't matter. What matters is the evaluation of the Georgia football staff. And, that's why some of these recruiting services tag another star when a kid gets a Georgia offer or move them up in the rankings. But I guarantee you Kirby's not, waiting to see the recruiting rankings before he goes out there and makes offers. So I think he wants to stay on top of the talent acquisition. I also think he wants to make the deals. He wants those players to know that, look, you're accountable to me. This is our deal. This is our, relationship. And, he wants to maintain that. So even if they bring in other people that put together film or the first to reach out or deal with the middle people, ultimately Kirby Smart's going to be the guy at the head of that table, at least for now.
And at the end of the day, it's Kirby Smart on the microphone screaming at you at your hardest moment, or he is in the huddle, encouraging you at your most important moment. So really good stuff. I really appreciate Coach Richt giving us that time. Like you said, and the way you guys started that conversation was talking a little bit about Carson Beck. It was interesting to hear him talk about how Miami is going to have a pretty good offensive line protecting him, and you talked about the weapons that will be around him down there in Miami. As they kind of rebuild some of their weapons moved on, but a lot of guys that they will have down there he can throw to. So Carson Beck was also there. You mentioned that you got a good amount of time with him, and it seemed like what was your big takeaway from spending a little time with our old quarterback?
I think Carson was relieved to be able to talk to DawgNation. I think he was relieved to be able to tell everyone how much he appreciated Georgia. I mean, he's excited about his new beginning, make no mistake about it. But I think he wants people to know how much he loved Georgia and how much he put into it. I know that, things didn't end the way anybody wanted. He certainly didn't want to suffer a season-ending injury in the SEC title game. It was nice that his last play as a Bulldog was a handoff for the game-winning touchdown. That seemed fitting, for a guy that, wasn't able to win a title in 2 years. And, to be fair, he didn't have the supporting cast that Stetson Bennett had. He didn't have the defense. He didn't have all those players. And even when he had Ladd and Brock, they were injured. And I fully believe, Cody, that if Ladd and Brock were healthy, they would have beat Alabama in that SEC championship game. So, this is a guy that waited 3 years for his turn. He went 24-3 as a starter. I think he became the poster child for NIL. I think he made some mistakes on his social media account. But Carson Beck, the person, he's not a bad guy. He didn't make the wrong headlines. You didn't see him involved in any off-field stuff that was against the law or bringing headlines down, begging questions about his character. The one thing, and I told Mario Cristobal this, to me, the most important thing to fix with Carson is aesthetics. I thought the body language at times, and I think sometimes Carson's messaging wasn't as good as it could be, but I think he's aware of all that. And as Coach Cristobal told me, he said, hey, I like that he's made these mistakes and learned from them. This is a guy who knows what's important and what's not important. Now, how do you get better at anything? Reps, right? Well, he had a lot of reps with that. Carson's name was out there a lot with the Lamborghini and the Gucci bag and, whether he would say enough on the field to his teammates. So Carson understands the things he's got to do to amp it up. So that was one takeaway was how excited Miami is to have him. But I think ultimately the big takeaway, and, I even texted some, Georgia staff this. I said, the guy literally had tears in his eyes talking about his time at Georgia and how much he loved Georgia. And when he said, I'll always be a Bulldog, he didn't have to say that. Nobody put those words in his mouth. And, that's a mouthful for a guy that's in another program right now to say that, I believe.
He's got a lot of rings with G's on him from his time at Georgia, that's for sure. It was interesting what you said. Now, Miami's not a small brand by any stretch of the imagination, but as you said, they don't get the same amount of coverage maybe that Georgia does, at least from the local media. Will that be good for him not to have 45 guys writing Carson Beck's report card after every game?
I don't think anything's going to phase him now. And the other thing is, he brings a lot of street cred, coming out of 5 years at Georgia and the level of games he's played in with his new teammates. He steps into some big shoes. Cam Ward, and credit to Mark Richt. He told me last year before the year how good that quarterback was when Cam Ward was still being projected as a 4th or a 5th rounder. Certainly not the number 1 pick that he was, but Carson goes into a system that's produced a number 1 overall quarterback in the draft, number 1 overall draft pick. As Coach Rick said, behind a really good offensive line. It is the ACC, but you take a closer look, and they're playing Notre Dame in Florida. And that Notre Dame game in the opener is going to mean a lot to Carson. He wasn't able to line up against the Irish. He talked about that, and how much he hated that he couldn't help his teammates in that game. So he's going to get his shot against the Irish early on, and then they're going to get to play the Florida Gators down there in Miami. And of course, Carson, no stranger to that rivalry, being a Jacksonville guy. So I'm excited to watch Carson in Miami on the fringe. I mean, obviously we're dialed into Georgia, and but on the side, I'm going to keep an eye on Carson Beck. I wouldn't be surprised to see Miami in the playoffs, Cody.
When it comes to how Georgia fans react, I put it in two boats, right? Like it's either A.D. Mitchell or it's Jermaine Burton. A.D. Mitchell played and transferred, and Dog fans still loved him and cheered for him. Jermaine Burton, Dog fans, could wish, good sayonara, right? Good riddance. Where do you think Carson Beck falls in between an A.D. Mitchell or a guy like Jermaine Burton?
Well, I think that's a great point to make, because Jermaine Burton was a better teammate than A.D. Mitchell, and yet the outside perception doesn't always match the reality, right? I mean, Jermaine Burton's teammates loved him at Georgia, and not to say that people hated A.D. Mitchell, but there were times, when he wasn't is dialed in maybe to the practices as Jermaine Burton was, playing through injuries, and A.D. Mitchell sat out. Let's remember that. So not to turn that into a sidebar or something, but that's a case in point. You don't know what you don't know as a fan sometimes. And I think we got to look at this differently now. There's, the transfer portal is very real. Carson didn't leave Georgia because he didn't like Georgia. He left for an opportunity after he declared for the draft. And, Miami's putting a lot more money on the table. And this is a fresh start where a number 1 quarterback was in an offense where he can show NFL executives he can learn a new offense and play for a different coach. That adds value to Carson Beck, actually. The NFL people, they like that in quarterbacks. They like seeing quarterbacks that have transferred and shown they can win a new locker room. They can learn a new system. They can do things, play against other teams. So, and then I just look at the NFL. I mean, you don't see the Indianapolis Colts fans booing Peyton Manning. I mean, He spent a lot of his career with the Indianapolis Colts, and then he went to Denver and won a Super Bowl, and yet both fan bases enjoy him. And, I asked Mark Richt about that, and for an exclusive story we had on AJC.com, and Mark Richt basically said, look, this guy was a part of Georgia for 5 years. And unless Georgia's playing against Miami, he thinks Georgia fans should root for the guy. He said, because he's a part of you. He was developed at Georgia. He was grown and went to school and coached up at Georgia. So Carson Beck is an extension of the Georgia Bulldogs. And I understand there used to be a time if a guy transferred out, we looked at, but it's just not there anymore. And we have to kind of adjust our thinking and look at every case situation on an individual basis and look at what that guy gave to the program. And did he represent himself properly? Is he going to represent the school well? And how does he speak about the school? And all Carson did for 40 minutes, and this is on our DawgNation YouTube page, you'll hear Carson talk a lot about the Georgia Bulldogs in that 41-minute interview that people can get if they sign up for our YouTube channel, YouTube channel.
Would encourage you guys to subscribe to our YouTube channel. Like Mike said, it is free. You can hop on there, just hit subscribe. We'll let us know that you're watching, which is good for us to know, but also you'll be alerted when we get stuff like this, because this is stuff that maybe you're not expecting, like a normal Monday press conference from Kirby Smart, which, by the way, are all on there as well. But then you get little nuggets like this because DawgNation understands dog fans and what we're interested in. So really interesting right there. All right, so if we're going to talk a little transfers right before we wrap up the show here today, Carson Beck does have you thinking, are there transfers? And I've put some guys out here on a list that have transferred away from Georgia who, you know what? It'd be nice if he was on the roster right about now as Georgia looks at this season. So I'm interested from you, Mike. Maybe you can throw some out there, or we can just discuss maybe some of the names that I have here of some dogs who have transferred away for whatever reason. And maybe, man, it wouldn't be bad to have that guy on the roster right about now. So Carson Beck could be one, right? He could be at quarterback for Georgia. Now, some dog fans will argue either way, but we'll move on from Carson. Who else is out there who once upon a time was in Athens and now somewhere else?
Well, I want to be clear that just because we name these guys doesn't necessarily mean that we don't like the guys they already got. I mean, Kirby's already gone to work and replaced him with great players. So
Right.
when I point to Austin Blasky at North Carolina being their center, it's not a knock on Drew Bobo. Drew Bobo's, I think, is going to have a really good year, and I think that he's fine there. But yeah, if you had Blasky there as a experienced guy, you remember how versatile he was at Georgia. AJ Harris, he's projected to be a top 10 NFL draft pick. Now, who knows how that works out? He's at Penn State, but and now you've got Daniel Harris and Ellis Robinson over there. But what if it was a top 10 pick opposite of Dalen Everett? So not to say anything bad about the current guys. We know about Damon Wilson, but Darius Smith is the backup. You mentioned just a second ago, Cody, that your concerns about the outside edge rush, and Damon Wilson was a guy that was coming on, and Darius Smith was a guy with a lot of talent. And then, of course, it's hard not to notice a guy like Jamal Jarrett's out there, or Jonathan Jefferson at SMU. These are big-bodied guys that would be veterans in the Georgia defensive tackle rotation, which, again, is not to say that Georgia's not good there. But if you had all those guys and you didn't have to spend all that money on transfers at other positions, then maybe you spend it somewhere else. So, but it's the world we live in. All great programs are losing great players. I mean, Alabama lost the best defensive player in the league last year in Caleb Downs. They also lost a guy that won the Remington Award as a center at Ohio State. Ohio State went out and bought a former SEC rushing champ, Quinshon Judkins from Ole Miss, a Big 12 championship quarterback in Will Howard, a Remington Award winner at center, and arguably the best defensive player in the SEC in Caleb Downs. I mean, that's impact. But they lost some dudes too. So it's just the way the game is working now. It's kind of fun to take a look around. And, I always want to see these Georgia guys do well. I mean, you better believe Sam Pittman appreciates, Xavier Sori at linebacker. That was a really athletic guy that just couldn't break in to the lineup. So he went somewhere where he had an opportunity. So those are the guys that come to mind for me, Cody.
Yeah, I had all those guys on my list as well. Xavier Sori shows up to SEC Media Days. I'm like, oh yeah, you could have been a little bit older. A lot of it on the Georgia roster shows up with, hey, there should have been the next crew ready just to walk right into that position. And, we're leaning on some younger guys. Kirby Smart gave us the stat, right, on how young his team is going to be this year. Part of that reason is some of the guys just couldn't wait. And they, everybody transfers for a different reason too. I think that's the thing we always have to remember. It's like sometimes Georgia has encouraged guys, hey man, you may want to hit the portal, or, and sometimes it's just guys saying, hey, I got a better opportunity. I'm going to make more money. I mean, there's so many different reasons to transfer nowadays. So it's hard to hold stuff against people, but it's just kind of a fun thing to think about, like, oh yeah, so that hole in this roster, it was recruited to not have a hole in this roster. It just so happened that guy didn't make it all the way to 2025's roster.
Well, a great example of that is you got to look at coaches. You go back to, what was it, 2004, when Kirby Smart was hired to be a running backs coach for Mark Richt. And, I've talked to, Coach Richt about that. And he's like, look, I know he's a defensive specialist. I just wanted him on the staff, and I didn't have a spot for him on the defensive side at that point. So we made him the running backs coach. And, Kirby came back to Georgia. Hey, but Kirby left. Kirby transferred out. He transferred to the Miami Dolphins and Nick Saban and he helped Alabama win 4 championships. But, you don't hold that against him, even though he's a Georgia guy. You say, well, that's where the opportunity was. Yeah. That's what fit him best. And we see that with position coaches as well. So, and sometimes it's a promotion for him, or sometimes it's just a different opportunity to work in a different system. And that's kind of where we're at now with players. And these are what the rules tell us they're able to do. And, I think it's fine if players want to play somewhere else. And that's what Kirby wants. He wants guys that want to be here. And we've said it before, Georgia ain't for everybody. So, good luck to those guys if they represented themselves well in the program. And, those are guys that, they have a Georgia background. And like you said, a lot of them have national championship rings.
And it'd be interesting, too, to see how Kirby taken some of those names that we talked about and the guys who have transferred. How has that shaped how Kirby recruits guys moving forward? And is that part of this message about relationships over transactions? Is that something he learned the hard way from maybe a name on that list or some other name that, okay, when I get a guy who is from far away that I'm paying a lot of money, you know what? Sometimes he may not stick around, but if I get maybe a star less from a guy who's from the in-state of Georgia, he may not want to leave, or he may love this program his whole life, and maybe that's worth something as well. So it'll be interesting to see how he learned.
I thought it was interesting, Cody, when Kirby was asked in a different interview there, if there was one thing that he could change about college football, what would he like it to be? And he said to make contracts enforceable. In other words, so that as you just said, if you sign a kid, he's going to stick around. And for someone to come along and grab him, they're going to have to pay that school some money. And when you think about the guys that George has produced that have gone other places, there's a value for the work that George has put in, not just in recruiting the kid, but developing the kid. So if you're going to take something off George's plate, you're going to have to pay him for it, right? So there's a value to that. So I thought when Kirby said that, it kind of went along with what you were just saying, as far as the relationships, but the contracts now that kids are getting paid, to fulfill those obligations or to be compensated if they leave early, just like a coach who has a buyout in his contract.
Yeah, it reminds you a lot of professional soccer. You have the transfer fee, you've got to pay the other team, and then you still get to pay the player as well. All right, Mike, this has been a really fun show. So we kind of were all over the place, starting with superlatives, and we hit Mark Richt, and then we hit Carson Beck. So I really appreciate all really good stuff today. We're getting closer and closer to football season. It's still hot out there, but we'll be under the lights very, very soon.
Yeah, I look forward to that, man. And Kirby wants it hot. That was interesting. Kirby, Carson talking about the humidity down there, and he said the air in Georgia, it's just stifling. And I remember last fall, and you remember this too, Cody. Kirby said, yeah, it just wasn't hot enough. I really wish it would have been a little bit. And he's going to turn the heat up on the Dogs this fall. You've heard him talk about fire, passion, energy, work ethic. He's going to squeeze everything out of them to get these guys as ready as they can possibly be. Because it's going to be a tough season. There's a lot of parity. It's a tough schedule. There needs to be a lot of growth that takes place.
We've squeezed everything out of this episode. We'll see you next Monday night right back here on The Beat.